He shielded the enemy's child, and the alien queen claimed him as her own HFY. The air was thick, almost viscous, carrying a faint metallic scent that made him instinctively cover his nose. Jagged rocks stretched into the distance like broken teeth, and in the pale green light of Zorinth's twin suns, the shadows twisted unnaturally, almost as if the planet itself were alive. Kale squinted against the glare, scanning the horizon. Somewhere out there, alien patrols were hunting. Somewhere out there, the life of a child hung in balance, and he was about to stumble into the center of it. His squad had been sent to Zorinth to assess the aftermath of a border skirmish, to retrieve survivors, and to gather intelligence about the alien race known as the Thrylians. They were not a forgiving species. The Thrylians had sharp, angular bodies covered in tough exoskeletons, with multifaceted eyes that could spot movement at incredible distances. To humans, they were monsters. To each other, they were civilization. Kale had studied them, prepared himself for combat, but nothing could prepare him for what he found first. A faint cry carried over the rocky plain. It was weak but piercing, filled with fear. Kale froze, instincts kicking in. His hand hovered over his sidearm, but another part of him, the part that had led him to survive countless missions, urged him to look closer before reacting. He moved cautiously, taking each step with care, ears straining. The sound came again, softer this time, almost like a whisper against the wind. Kale followed it to a small crevice between two jagged rocks. Inside, curled in a huddle, was a Thrylian child. Its exoskeleton was a pale, soft shade, not yet hardened like an adult's, and its many eyes were wide with fear. It was injured, one of its limbs bent at an unnatural angle, and a thin line of dark fluid oozed from the joint. The child made no sudden movements, only whimpered softly as Kale crouched down, keeping his voice calm. "Hey," he whispered, "it's okay. I won't hurt you." The child flinched at his words, and Kale froze, worried that any sudden move would provoke an attack. He had no way of knowing if the Thrylian child had been trained to defend itself, or if its instincts were purely survival. Slowly, he extended a hand, showing that he meant no harm. The child blinked, its multifaceted eyes reflecting the green light, and Kale took that as a small victory. He could hear shouts and movement in the distance. Thrylian patrols were nearby, hunting for the missing child. Kale's mind raced. Leaving it here would mean almost certain death. Taking it with him would be dangerous, but Kale had always believed in one principle above all else: protecting the innocent, no matter who they were. That belief had gotten him through countless missions, and he wasn't about to abandon it now. He gently lifted the child, cradling it carefully. The Thrylian's small body trembled, and Kale whispered reassurances. "I've got you. You're safe with me. I promise." Moving through the jagged landscape wasn't easy. Every step required careful calculation. Kale avoided open areas, keeping to the shadows, using the terrain to his advantage. He remembered the training he had received in human survival tactics, the improvisation, the unpredictability, the ability to use natural cover in ways the Thrylians would never expect. Every rock, every slope, every shadow became a tool for survival. Hours passed, and Kale realized that the child had grown quieter, less tense, though its large eyes never left him. He wondered what it had seen, what stories it could never tell. Humans often assumed aliens were simple in thought, but Kale had learned otherwise. Even in their brief encounters, he had seen intelligence, strategy, and emotion. This child, helpless as it seemed, had survived alone in hostile territory. That alone told him it had strength. As night fell, Zorinth's twin moons cast an eerie glow across the landscape. Kale found a small cave, partially concealed by a natural overhang. He laid the child down gently, keeping one hand on it, ready to react to any threat. He searched the cave quickly, finding nothing dangerous, and then settled in himself. The child finally made a small noise, almost like curiosity mixed with fear. Kale leaned closer. "You're safe for now," he said softly. "I won't let anyone hurt you, not while I'm here." For the first time since he found it, the child reached out, touching his hand with one delicate limb. The contact was fleeting, but Kale felt a strange warmth, a connection that transcended species, fear, and language. He smiled faintly, a rare softness in a man trained for war. Sleep was brief. Kale had to remain alert, knowing the Thrylian patrols would resume their search with the dawn. He and the child moved silently through the jagged terrain, using every skill he possessed to stay ahead. When they came to a cliff overlooking a valley, Kale paused. From below, he could see the alien soldiers combing the landscape, moving methodically, searching for the missing child. Kale's heart pounded, but he kept calm. He considered the possibilities. If he could draw the patrols away, they might be able to escape. If not, well, Kale didn't allow himself to think about failure. Human ingenuity had gotten him this far, and he intended to use it to its fullest. He gathered loose rocks and small debris, setting up a series of simple, human-made traps designed to mislead the aliens. It was risky. They were advanced enough to detect most primitive tricks, but the Thrylian patrols were not accustomed to unpredictability. Kale moved quickly, silently, and by the time the first alien soldier stumbled into his trap, he was already miles ahead, the child safe in his arms. By midday, they reached a river cutting through the rocky terrain. The water was shallow and fast-moving, and Kale used it to cover their scent. The child seemed to understand instinctively, clinging to him without fear. Kale marveled at its trust. It was a trust he knew he could not betray, no matter what the consequences. As they moved along the river, Kale's communicator crackled to life. "Raynor, report status," a voice ordered. It was his squad. Kale hesitated. He could signal them, but that would reveal the child's location. He decided against it. "No," he muttered to himself, "not yet." Hours stretched into exhaustion. Kale's mind wandered to the human world he had left behind. Family, friends, the small comforts of home. He missed them, but he knew that nothing on earth could have prepared him for the responsibility he carried now. Protecting the child was more than survival, it was a statement. Humanity could be more than soldiers. It could be guardians, even in the most alien of worlds. The sky darkened as night approached again. Kale found a small outcropping overlooking the river, safe from immediate threats. He set the child down gently and unrolled his small sleeping mat. For the first time, he allowed himself to rest, knowing the child would remain protected. As he drifted into a light sleep, Kale couldn't shake a single thought. The Thrylian child was not just a life to protect. It was a bridge between species, between understanding, and perhaps between two worlds that had always seen each other as enemies. And as dawn approached, Kale promised himself that he would shield it, whatever the cost, even if it meant defying everything he had ever known. The next morning, Zorinth's twin suns rose low over the jagged horizon, casting long, greenish shadows that twisted like living tendrils. Across the rocky terrain, Kale Raynor stirred slowly, his body stiff from the previous day's exertion. The child, curled beside him, blinked its many eyes at the rising light. Kale studied it for a moment, noting the subtle rise and fall of its breathing. It was still alive. That was what mattered most. Everything else could be handled. Kale rose quietly, careful not to startle the child. He scanned the surroundings. The river below glimmered faintly as it wound through the rocks. Beyond it, a stretch of uneven terrain led to a series of cliffs that might provide cover or danger, depending on which way the patrols had moved during the night. Kale knew they couldn't linger. The Thrylians were relentless, and a child alone in their territory would have been hunted and captured, or worse. Kale had seen the brutality of the enemy in his brief encounters, and he refused to allow that fate to befall this child. He picked up the child, its limbs clinging instinctively to his chest, and started moving along the riverbank. Each step required careful balance, avoiding sharp rocks and treacherous footing. Kale's mind raced, considering strategies. He needed to stay ahead of the patrols, but the Thrylians were smart. Their tracking abilities were advanced, far beyond anything a human scout might expect. Kale had to think differently. He had to use unpredictability, human improvisation, and instinct. As he moved, Kale noticed subtle signs that the Thrylians had passed recently. Broken branches, displaced stones, faint impressions in the soft green moss that coated the rocks. Their trail was not immediately visible, but he could sense it. The child stirred, making a small noise, and Kale pressed a finger to his lips. "SHH," he whispered. "We have to be quiet now." Kale's plan was simple but dangerous. If they could reach the cliffs and use the natural overhangs, he could slow the patrols, force them to waste time searching, and perhaps create enough distance to escape. He relied on the human advantage of thinking outside predictable patterns. Unlike the Thrylians, humans were not bound by instinctive repetition. Kale would exploit that. Hours passed. The suns climbed higher, their harsh light revealing every shadow and movement. Kale moved swiftly but cautiously, using low cover whenever possible. The child, though small, seemed to sense the urgency, pressing closer with each step. Kale murmured reassurances, though he was aware the words meant little to a species whose language he barely understood. Actions, not words, were the bond they shared. Suddenly, the sound of movement ahead froze Kale in place. A Thrylian patrol had appeared, gliding smoothly across the rocks with a precision that made Kale's pulse quicken. Their armor reflected the green sunlight, their multifaceted eyes scanning systematically. Kale pressed himself against a jagged boulder, hoping the patrol would pass without noticing them. The child's grip on his chest tightened. The patrol stopped, scanning the area with their long-range sensors. Kale held his breath. His heart pounded, but he reminded himself of the advantage humans had: improvisation. Slowly, carefully, he gathered loose rocks and small debris, then threw them a short distance away. The clatter echoed slightly. A soldier turned its head, investigating the noise. Kale seized the moment, ducking behind another boulder and moving silently in the opposite direction. The patrol lingered for several tense minutes before moving on. Kale exhaled slowly, relief flooding him. The child remained quiet, as if sensing the danger had passed. Kale murmured softly, "We're okay for now." They continued along the cliffs, but Kale knew the danger was far from over. The Thrylians were methodical. They would not give up. Kale needed a long-term plan. He considered the options. Hiding indefinitely was impossible. Escaping the planet without detection seemed unlikely. That left one option: outsmart the enemy, move unpredictably, and use every skill he had to protect the child. As the day wore on, Kale spotted a series of caves partially concealed by rocky outcroppings. The caves looked natural, but some were small enough to serve as temporary shelters or traps. Kale decided to investigate, carrying the child carefully. Inside the first cave, the air was cool and damp. Kale checked for signs of life or danger, finding none. It was perfect, a temporary hideout where he could rest and plan. Kale set the child down gently, unrolling his portable sleeping mat and checking his supplies. He had food rations, a small water container, and basic medical supplies. The child's injury needed attention, but Kale was cautious. Any wrong move could worsen it. He cleaned the wound as best as he could, using antiseptic wipes and careful hands. The child flinched but did not resist. Kale whispered soothingly, though the child did not understand the words. His calm presence, steady hands, and gentle tone were enough to communicate safety. Hours later, as the suns dipped toward the horizon, Kale prepared to rest briefly. His mind, however, refused to slow. He reviewed every possibility, every patrol route, and every potential danger. He realized the child's presence changed everything. He could no longer think solely in terms of survival. Now, he had to think in terms of protection, strategy, and human advantage. Humans survived because they adapted, because they could improvise. Kale would rely on that now more than ever. During the night, a sudden noise jolted him awake. The cave entrance trembled slightly, and Kale's instincts kicked in. He grabbed his sidearm, moving silently toward the source. Outside, shadows shifted unnaturally, and the air carried a faint metallic scent that made his stomach tighten. A patrol had found the area. Kale pressed the child against his chest, shielding it instinctively. He could see the patrol's sensors scanning the landscape, searching for any sign of movement. Kale weighed his options. Engaging them directly was suicide. Retreating further could expose them. Then he remembered a technique from his training, using reflections to mislead enemies. He grabbed a small, reflective piece of metal from his pack and angled it to catch the light, creating a false glint in the opposite direction. The patrol diverted, inspecting the shiny reflection while Kale and the child slipped quietly along a hidden path. Hours passed in silence, broken only by the distant sounds of alien soldiers searching. Kale moved tirelessly, aware that rest was limited, survival was temporary, and the child's trust was fragile. He spoke to it softly at intervals, using a mix of words, tones, and gestures to convey calm. The child responded in subtle ways, shifting slightly, pressing closer, or blinking its eyes in a pattern that suggested understanding. Kale realized that even without language, a bond was forming. By dawn, they had covered miles. Kale scanned the horizon, noting changes in the landscape. A dense forest of bioluminescent plants stretched ahead, their soft glow providing cover and disorienting any pursuers. Kale smiled faintly. It was risky, but humans thrived on risk, on adaptability. They would move through the forest, using shadows, sounds, and natural cover to their advantage. As they entered the forest, Kale marveled at its alien beauty. The plants pulsed with light, creating shifting patterns that made it difficult to track movement. Every step was careful, every breath measured. The child's eyes reflected the glow, wide with awe and trust. Kale felt a rare warmth, a sense that this small life depended entirely on him. That dependence was not a burden, it was a responsibility he accepted fully. Suddenly, a low hum vibrated through the forest. Kale froze. The child stiffened, its many eyes scanning in all directions. The hum grew louder, a mechanical rhythm that resonated with the ground. Kale recognized it immediately, Thrylian tracking drones. They were not soldiers, but their sensors were precise and relentless. Kale's mind raced. He could not let the drones detect them, but direct confrontation was impossible. He spotted a small trench between two thick, glowing plants. Moving quickly, he ducked inside, dragging the child with him. The hum grew closer and Kale held his breath, counting seconds, heart hammering. The drone passed, its sensors sweeping inches from their hiding place, oblivious to the still forms pressed into the trench. Kale exhaled silently, relief flooding him, but he knew this was only the beginning. The Thrylians would escalate their search. Kale continued moving through the forest, aware that their journey was far from over. Each step tested his ingenuity, his patience, and his endurance. But through every challenge, one truth remained clear. He would protect the child. No matter the danger, no matter the enemy, no matter the odds, humanity's strength was more than technology or weapons. It was courage, empathy, and adaptability. Kale had all three, and he would use them to survive and safeguard the child who had, in some unspoken way, already begun to trust him completely. Kale had been moving through the dense forest for hours, the bioluminescent plants casting shifting patterns across his path. Every footstep was calculated, every breath measured, yet a tension he could not ignore had begun to settle in his chest. The hum of Thrylian drones had faded, but their presence lingered like a shadow. The enemy did not rest, and neither could he, not while the child remained in his care. The child, curled against his chest, stirred as he adjusted his grip. Its many eyes flicked toward him, wide and alert. Kale whispered softly, as he had countless times before, "Almost there. Just a little further." Though it could not understand the words, it seemed to comprehend the tone, the promise. That trust, fragile yet unbroken, weighed on him more heavily than any weapon or threat. It was a responsibility he would carry to the end. Ahead, the forest opened slightly into a clearing, and Kale's sharp eyes caught a movement that made his pulse quicken. Figures emerged from the shadows, not patrols, not drones, but larger, more imposing forms. Their exoskeletons gleamed in the greenish light, and their presence radiated authority. Kale froze. These were no ordinary soldiers. This was something else entirely. One figure stepped forward, taller than the rest, with a crown-like structure on its head. Kale's mind raced as he realized the truth. This was the alien queen. The leader of the Thrylians herself had come to the forest, and behind her the child, his child, was revealed in a way he had not anticipated. The queen's multifaceted eyes swept over him, assessing, analyzing. Her voice, though not in a language he understood, resonated in his mind. Humans did not always comprehend alien communication, but the tone was unmistakable. Dominance, curiosity, and something faintly like awe. Kale's training had prepared him for combat, for strategy, for survival, but nothing had prepared him for this. He instinctively pressed the child closer, shielding it from the queen's gaze. The queen's eyes narrowed slightly, not with anger but with recognition. She had sensed the child's absence, and now, through some link humans could not perceive, she knew the protector's identity. Kale stood firm, chest rising and falling steadily, projecting confidence and control. He would not flinch. He could not. The queen spoke again, her voice rippling through the clearing like a wave, and Kale understood something crucial. She was communicating, not commanding. She was aware of his intentions, aware that he had shielded the child. In human terms, she was analyzing, judging, and deciding his fate in the span of moments. Kale's mind worked rapidly. How could he demonstrate worthiness, intelligence, and integrity to a being who could perceive his thoughts in ways he could barely comprehend? He stepped forward slightly, hands raised in a gesture of non-aggression but still holding the child close. "I am here to protect," he said, his voice calm but firm. It was a universal truth, and perhaps the only one that mattered. "I will not let anyone harm the child." The queen's eyes flared briefly, a light that seemed almost like a warning. But then she paused. Something in Kale's stance, his expression, his unwavering commitment, resonated with her. He was not a soldier seeking glory. He was not an intruder seeking conquest. He was a guardian, and that concept, strange, rare, and perhaps unique, had value even to her. The clearing remained tense for long moments. Kale could feel the queen's presence like a weight pressing on him, but he refused to show fear. The child, sensing the shift, pressed its small body closer to him. Kale whispered softly, "Stay calm. We're not in danger." Perhaps they were in some terms, but he would not let panic dictate their fate. The queen extended a limb toward the child, and Kale tensed. But instead of a threat, she touched lightly, a gesture of recognition and connection. The child did not resist. Kale realized with awe that the queen was not here to punish him. She was here to understand. She was here to make a choice. Minutes stretched into what felt like hours. Kale stood firm, maintaining eye contact, projecting every ounce of human resolve. He understood instinctively that in this moment, his species' greatest strength, empathy, courage, adaptability, was his bargaining tool, not weapons. Not brute force, not technology, only the ability to act with integrity, to protect, and to connect across boundaries no being had ever crossed before. The queen's gaze shifted from Kale to the child, and something remarkable occurred. There was a subtle shift in posture, a softening of the exoskeleton's rigid lines, almost like curiosity mixed with approval. Kale sensed her decision forming. In her own way, she recognized the humanity he embodied, the courage to protect, the ingenuity to survive, the heart to care. Then, in a gesture no one on his side could have predicted, the Queen spoke to Kale directly. Her voice, now slightly altered, carried a tone humans could understand. "You are different," she said. "Your actions defy expectation. You protect what is ours, yet you are not ours. You are remarkable." Kale's pulse quickened. Every fiber of his being understood the weight of her words. Recognition from a species that had never trusted humans, acknowledgement from a being who could see and judge in ways no human could, was a rare, perhaps unprecedented gift. "I only do what is right," Kale replied, keeping his voice steady. "The child deserves protection. That is enough for me." A silence followed, filled with tension, curiosity, and the weight of unspoken decisions. Then, unexpectedly, the Queen extended her limb again, this time in a gesture that humans might call invitation. Kale instinctively understood. She was claiming him in a way that transcended language, as protector of the child and as a being worthy of her notice. Kale's mind raced. To accept would be to enter a role humans had never imagined, an alien consort, a guardian recognized by the ruler of a foreign species. Yet refusing could mean danger, not only to him but to the child. And Kale had learned long ago that moral courage often required embracing the unknown, standing firm when fear urged retreat. He nodded once firmly, and in that moment, a subtle bond was forged. The child, sensing the shift, blinked its eyes slowly, a gesture of trust and relief. Kale realized that survival was no longer simply about avoiding death. It was about connection, understanding, and the fragile alliances that could alter the course of entire worlds. The Queen's presence began to recede slightly, though she did not leave. Her many eyes continued to study Kale, measuring, assessing. Then she spoke again, this time addressing the forest itself. "You will remain under his protection," she declared. "No harm shall come while he stands." Kale's heart pounded with a mixture of relief and awe. He understood the significance. The most powerful being on the planet had recognized his strength, not in battle but in character. Humanity, in its small, fragile form, had made a mark on an alien world. Over the next hours, Kale and the child moved with the Queen's silent blessing. No patrols interfered. No drones tracked them. The alien presence was still felt, a constant weight reminding him that this reprieve was temporary. Kale knew that survival depended on continued vigilance, on clever movement, and on using every ounce of human ingenuity. As they traveled, Kale began to notice subtle changes in the child. It moved more confidently, pressed closer in trust rather than fear, and seemed to understand the intent behind Kale's gestures. Even without language, a silent communication had developed, a bond that transcended species, driven by empathy, protection, and shared survival. Night fell again over Zorinth, and Kale found a sheltered area near a cluster of glowing plants. He prepared a small camp, arranging supplies and tending once more to the child's injuries. Though exhaustion gnawed at him, he remained vigilant. The Queen's recognition did not remove danger, it merely altered the rules. Kale knew that understanding, preparation, and trust would be their greatest weapons. As Kale settled beside the child, he reflected on what had occurred. The Thrylian Queen, a being of immense power and intellect, had seen something uniquely human in him: courage, empathy, and the unyielding will to protect life. In that recognition lay hope, not only for survival, but for the potential to reshape the relationship between species that had been enemies for generations. He whispered softly, as he had countless times, "We're not alone anymore. You're safe and will survive this." The child's eyes blinked slowly, and Kale understood that the bond had solidified. They were no longer simply survivor and protected. They were partners in a dangerous, uncertain world, bound by trust, courage, and the fragile hope of something better. Kale did not know what tomorrow would bring. He did not know what trials awaited them beyond the forest or what the Queen's full intentions might be. But one thing was certain: humanity's strength was not in dominance, but in resilience, empathy, and ingenuity. And Kale would embody that strength, protecting the child and navigating the perilous path ahead, no matter the cost. The forest hummed with life, and the twin moons cast a pale glow over the clearing. Kale remained alert, chest rising and falling steadily, guarding a life that had become more than a mission. It had become a testament to the power of human courage and heart. And somewhere, unseen but sensed, the Queen watched, her judgment transformed into cautious respect, marking a new chapter in a story neither species could have imagined. Kale felt the weight of responsibility more than ever. The Queen's recognition had shifted the rules of their survival, but it had not removed the danger. The Thrylian patrols still roamed, the terrain was treacherous, and the child remained fragile. Yet, for the first time since landing on Zorinth, Kale felt a spark of hope, a fragile belief that humans could accomplish more than mere survival, that they could influence events even among a species that had long considered them inferior. He moved cautiously through a dense stretch of forest, carrying the child in his arms. The plants pulsed with a gentle light, illuminating the path ahead, but also casting long shadows that could conceal threats. Kale kept his senses sharp, listening for the hum of drones, the faint footfalls of patrols, or any sound that indicated they were being followed. Despite the Queen's presence and her subtle protection, Kale knew not to rely solely on it. Survival demanded vigilance. The child stirred, making a small sound that Kale interpreted as curiosity. He glanced down and saw its many eyes fixated on a glowing plant. Kale smiled faintly. Despite everything, life had its moments of wonder, even in the midst of danger. "See this," he murmured. "Everything here is strange, but it's beautiful too." The child made a noise in response, a soft chirp-like sound, as if acknowledging his words. Kale felt a small warmth in his chest. Protecting this life was not just a duty, it was becoming a purpose, a reason to persevere beyond fear and fatigue. Hours passed as they moved cautiously toward the cliffs, the Queen's presence sensed more than seen. Kale did not fully understand her intentions, but he knew she was observing, judging, and perhaps testing him. Every choice he made, every step, every interaction with the child was under her unseen scrutiny. He could feel it in the way the forest seemed to respond to his presence, in the subtle shifts of air and light, and in the faint echo of authority that lingered behind him. As they approached a series of jagged cliffs, Kale paused. The terrain ahead was dangerous, but it also offered opportunity. If he could navigate the cliffs carefully, he could gain higher ground, which would help him anticipate patrol movements, avoid traps, and plan his next steps. He carefully set the child down, keeping it close and protected while he inspected the path ahead. Every rock, every crevice, every ledge had to be considered. One misstep could be fatal. The child watched him intently, as if understanding the importance of his assessment. Kale spoke softly, more to reassure himself than the child. "We have to be smart. One wrong step and we're done. But we can do this. We always find a way." Humans had survived countless impossible situations by relying on ingenuity and adaptability. Kale would rely on the same principles now. Moving carefully, he led the child along the cliffside, finding hidden ledges and narrow paths that allowed them to stay out of view. The Thrylian patrols below were still searching, but the Queen's subtle interference seemed to delay their progress. Kale could not fully rely on this, but it allowed him time to think, to strategize, and to teach the child about movement, observation, and caution in a world that was anything but forgiving. As the sun dipped lower in the sky, Kale found a sheltered outcrop that offered both protection and a vantage point. He set the child down and began to plan. The Thrylians were relentless, and the longer they remained on the planet, the higher the chance of encountering a patrol that would not tolerate any deviation from protocol. Kale had to consider long-term survival, which meant more than hiding. It meant finding allies, leveraging knowledge, and demonstrating human ingenuity in ways that the aliens could not anticipate. Kale observed the landscape from his vantage point, noting the patterns of patrol movement, the natural cover, and the flow of the terrain. He began formulating a plan that relied on misdirection, traps, and careful use of the environment. He had studied the Thrylians extensively, learning their strengths and weaknesses. They were powerful, precise, and disciplined, but they were also predictable in certain ways, reliant on sensors, and unaccustomed to improvisation. Kale would exploit these traits. Over the next several hours, Kale moved strategically, setting subtle decoys that would mislead any approaching patrols. He used reflective surfaces, small noises, and controlled disturbances in the terrain to create false trails. The child remained close, observing him, and Kale realized that it was beginning to understand some of the principles of survival: how to remain silent, how to move with caution, and how to respond to threats without panic. This was not just protection, it was teaching, passing on the human advantage in ingenuity and adaptability. Night fell fully, and Kale knew the forest would offer temporary concealment. The child rested beside him, and Kale kept watch. Even with the Queen's influence providing a measure of safety, he remained alert. He reflected on what had occurred since encountering the Queen. Recognition from a being of such power was unprecedented. It had shifted their immediate circumstances, but it had also placed an unspoken expectation on him. He had been tested and acknowledged, and now he had to prove that humans were not only capable of survival, but capable of adding value to a world far beyond Earth. The next day brought new challenges. A patrol moved along the valley below, larger and more disciplined than any they had encountered before. Kale assessed their path and calculated the risk. Engaging them was impossible, but Kale realized that a simple distraction, combined with careful timing, could allow them to advance without being detected. He gathered stones, branches, and pieces of reflective metal, constructing a simple trap that would create the illusion of movement elsewhere. When the patrol reached the area, the decoy drew their attention, allowing Kale and the child to slip past unseen. The child clung to him throughout, trusting implicitly. Kale marveled at the bond that had formed, so fragile yet unbreakable. Despite language barriers, despite the difference in species, a connection had been forged. Kale knew that empathy, trust, and courage were not human traits alone. They were universal, and they could bridge the widest gaps when wielded with care and purpose. By the third day, Kale realized that moving further without establishing a secure area would be too dangerous. He found a small plateau overlooking the forest and began constructing a temporary shelter using natural materials. He reinforced it with rocks and branches, creating a concealed position that would allow observation, defense, and rest. The child assisted in subtle ways, following his instructions and learning without direct explanation. Kale felt a sense of pride. Humanity's strength was often underestimated, yet here, in the heart of alien territory, their traits, intelligence, adaptability, courage, were proving decisive. While resting, Kale began to consider longer-term strategies. The Queen's recognition had granted a reprieve, but it also implied responsibility. He was no longer a simple survivor. He had to consider diplomacy, negotiation, and demonstration of value. Humans had thrived for millennia by forming alliances, improvising in unpredictable situations, and demonstrating resourcefulness in ways other species often could not. Kale would do the same here. As night fell again, Kale took the child to the edge of the plateau, showing it the valley below. He spoke softly, "Look at that. We have a chance here. not just to survive but to make a difference. The child watched silently, but Kale sensed understanding. It was learning to see the world as he did, to observe patterns, and to anticipate danger. In its small way, the child was becoming a partner, and Kale realized that partnership was the key to navigating the challenges ahead. The following morning, Kale observed a group of alien scouts approaching. Their movements were precise, yet Kale noted minor patterns that revealed predictability. Using the principles of human ingenuity, he devised a series of subtle distractions: displaced rocks, faint noises, and strategic placement of reflective surfaces. The scouts investigated the false signals, leaving Kale and the child to move forward without detection. Hours later, Kale reached the edge of the forest, the cliff stretching upward into higher terrain. From this vantage point, he could see wider patterns of patrol movement and areas suitable for establishing a semi-permanent safe zone. He paused, assessing options. Human strength lay in flexibility, in adaptation. He could use this terrain advantage to create a controlled environment, one in which they could rest, plan, and prepare for the next stage of their journey. Kale set up a temporary camp, reinforcing it with natural barriers and creating false paths to confuse potential intruders. The child observed quietly, following instructions and learning through imitation. Kale realized that humans had survived not because of superior strength, but because of the ability to learn, adapt, and teach. This child, too, was learning that lesson in its own way. As night settled over the cliffs, Kale kept watch, reflecting on the journey thus far. Humanity's value lay not only in survival, but in the capacity to influence, adapt, and protect life even in the most alien circumstances. He had demonstrated that courage, empathy, and ingenuity were traits that transcended species boundaries. The Queen's acknowledgement was more than a reprieve, it was an opportunity, and Kale intended to seize it fully. The child slept beside him, small and fragile, yet alive and growing stronger. Kale whispered softly, "Tomorrow, we do more than survive. Tomorrow, we begin to show them what humans can really do." The bond between them was solid, their purpose intertwined, and Kale understood that this journey was not only about survival. It was about proving that humanity's greatest strength was its heart, mind, and unyielding will to protect life. The next morning, the sun rose over Zorinth in a pale green glow, bathing the jagged cliffs and alien forest in light that made every shadow appear sharper, more alive. Kale Rayner stood on the plateau, carrying the child in his arms, eyes scanning the distant forest. The Thrylians had not ceased their search, but Kale had learned to anticipate every move. His mind, sharpened by days of survival, mapped the terrain, patrol patterns, and natural cover with precision. This was not just survival now. It was strategy, diplomacy, and proof that humans could do more than endure. The child stirred, pressing closer instinctively. Kale looked down at it and smiled faintly. Despite the alien appearance, the multifaceted eyes, the soft yet firm exoskeleton, he felt an unspoken connection. In a world defined by danger and suspicion, trust had become their greatest weapon. Kale whispered softly, "We're ready. Today we take the next step." They moved carefully through the forest, descending from the cliffs toward the valley below. Kale's goal was simple but ambitious: to reach a central plateau controlled by the Queen's forces, where he could demonstrate not only the child's safety but humanity's value. Each step required precision, each movement measured. The Thrylians were intelligent, disciplined, and relentless, but Kale had learned the advantage humans often held: creativity, adaptability, and the courage to act where others hesitated. As they approached the valley, Kale spotted a small group of Thrylian scouts patrolling the area. Their movements were sharp, deliberate, yet predictable. Kale crouched behind a rock, analyzing. A small plan formed in his mind. He would create a controlled distraction, stones and reflective surfaces strategically placed to draw attention and lead the scouts away from their path. Timing would be everything. Kale whispered instructions to the child, pointing towards small stones and gaps in the terrain. Though the child could not fully understand the language, it followed his gestures perfectly. This was proof of something Kale had long believed. Intelligence and trust could bridge even the widest species gap. With a final glance, Kale set the distraction in motion. The patrol investigated, leaving a clear path for Kale and the child to advance. Hours later, they reached the outskirts of the central plateau. Kale paused, observing the Thrylian forces. The queen was present, overseeing her troops, her crown-like structure glinting in the sunlight. Her multifaceted eyes scanned the area, and Kale could sense her recognition of him, her acknowledgement that he had succeeded in keeping the child safe thus far. The moment was tense, but Kale's confidence did not waver. He approached cautiously, holding the child firmly. The queen's gaze fixed on him. Around her, soldiers paused, sensing her attention and following her lead. Kale understood instinctively. This was not a confrontation, but an evaluation. His actions, his strategy, and his unwavering protection of the child were being judged. The queen's voice resonated in the clearing, translated through some universal method Kale could understand. "You have done what none of your kind could achieve," she said. "You have protected what is most precious, using courage, intelligence, and understanding. Humans, you are different." Kale's chest rose with a mix of relief and pride. "I only do what is right," he replied. "The child deserves safety. That is all I need to know." A silence followed, broken only by the faint rustle of alien flora. Then the queen made a gesture, one that humans might call invitation. She extended a limb toward Kale and the child, signaling acceptance, acknowledgement, and a bond that transcended species. Kale realized in that instant that the path ahead would no longer be one of mere survival. He had been recognized not as an intruder, but as a guardian, a partner, and a symbol of humanity's potential. Over the next several hours, Kale worked alongside the Queen's forces. He demonstrated human ingenuity, using natural terrain, improvised barriers, and misdirection techniques to improve defenses in the area. Alien soldiers observed with curiosity, impressed by his methods, which often relied on creativity rather than brute strength. Kale explained, through gestures and simple language, how small adjustments could enhance safety and efficiency. Slowly, the alien forces began to understand that human strategy offered unique advantages. The child followed closely, learning through observation. Kale noticed subtle changes. It moved more confidently, responded to his signals, and began to act with awareness. The bond between them, strengthened over days of survival, had grown into something profound. They were partners, and the child had begun to inherit some of the lessons that had allowed humans to survive in the most hostile environments. As the sun began to set, Kale paused to reflect. The journey had been perilous, constant threats, harsh terrain, and the uncertainty of alien judgment. Yet the trials had proven something fundamental. Humans had value beyond technology, beyond weapons, beyond numbers. Empathy, courage, and adaptability were traits that could shape destinies, even across galaxies. That evening, Kale and the child stood at the edge of the plateau, watching the alien forces move below. The queen approached, her gaze fixed on him. She spoke softly in words Kale could understand. "You have shown that humans are more than they seem. Your courage protects life, your mind finds solutions, and your heart bridges worlds. You are worthy of trust and now of a place among us." Kale's mind raced. Trust from an alien species, recognition from their queen, and safety for the child, all of it had been achieved through choices grounded in humanity's greatest strengths. He nodded solemnly, understanding the weight of responsibility that came with acknowledgement. "I will continue to protect," he said, "no matter what comes next." The queen regarded him for a long moment, then gestured toward the child. Kale understood. He was to remain as the protector, the teacher, and the bridge between species. The child blinked, pressing closer, its trust absolute. Kale felt a profound sense of purpose. Survival had become secondary to influence, to teaching, to shaping a future where humans could demonstrate their true value. Over the following days, Kale worked to strengthen the alliance. He trained select alien units in human tactics, simple improvisation, flexible strategies, and creative problem-solving. These soldiers, initially skeptical, began to appreciate the ingenuity humans could offer. Kale realized that this was more than protection. It was diplomacy, education, and the beginning of mutual understanding. The child, observing every action, began to interact more confidently with the alien soldiers. Its trust in Kale had created a ripple effect, fostering curiosity and cooperation among the troops. Kale smiled faintly. The lessons he had imparted through protection and guidance were taking root in unexpected ways. Humanity's strength was not measured by conquest, but by the ability to inspire, to adapt, and to protect. One morning, a sudden alert signaled the approach of a large Thrylian fleet from a distant sector. They moved with precision and speed, and Kale knew they had not yet witnessed the bond he had forged with the Queen and her forces. He acted quickly, coordinating defenses, setting up strategic positions, and using both human and alien methods to create an effective response. The child assisted, helping to observe, signal, and learn the intricacies of coordinated movement. When the fleet arrived, they encountered not chaos but an organized, adaptive force. Kale's strategies allowed the Queen's soldiers to anticipate movements, evade attacks, and respond efficiently. The enemy, accustomed to predictable patterns, was confused by the ingenuity of the defenders. Kale watched with satisfaction as his planning and human ingenuity proved decisive. After the encounter, the Queen approached Kale once more. Her multifaceted eyes glimmered with what humans might call respect. "You have not only protected the child, but you have strengthened our forces. Your presence is invaluable. Humans are extraordinary." Kale felt a rare sense of fulfillment. "We only do what we must," he replied. "Protection, understanding, survival, these are what matter." In the days that followed, Kale continued to teach, protect, and lead. The child grew stronger, more confident, and more aware of its surroundings. Kale marveled at the progress, realizing that the child's potential was far greater than he had initially imagined. By guiding, teaching, and protecting, he was shaping not only survival but a future in which humans could be respected across worlds. As the moons of Zorinth rose high in the sky, Kale stood beside the child at the edge of the plateau, watching the alien forces move below. The Queen had left a subtle presence, a watchful influence that ensured their safety. Kale felt a profound sense of purpose, understanding that his actions had changed the trajectory of not just his life, but the child's, and perhaps even the Thrylian civilization itself. He whispered softly, "We did it, we survived, and now we can do even more." The child pressed closer, a gesture of trust and partnership that Kale cherished. He realized that humanity's true power was not in dominance, not in strength, but in courage, empathy, and the ability to adapt, protect, and inspire across species. The forest shimmered with bioluminescent light, the valley below hummed with life, and Kale understood that the journey was far from over. Yet for the first time he felt certain that humanity had found its place, not through conquest, but through character, intelligence, and heart. And in that moment, he knew that he and the child, guided by mutual trust and the Queen's recognition, were shaping a future where humans could be more than survivors. They could be leaders, teachers, and guardians, even in the most alien of worlds. Kale took a deep breath, feeling the weight of responsibility and the spark of hope in equal measure. The child, safe and growing stronger with each passing day, blinked up at him. He smiled, feeling a connection that transcended species, language, and fear. They had survived, yes, but they had also created something extraordinary: trust, alliance, and the proof that humanity could thrive in the most unexpected places. As the twin moons cast their light across the cliffs, Kale held the child firmly, knowing that whatever challenges awaited, they were ready. Together, humans and Thrylians could find a way forward, through courage, empathy, and the simple, profound act of protecting what mattered most. Kale had shielded the enemy's child, and in doing so had not only claimed trust but had changed the course of a world. Humanity, in all its resilience, ingenuity, and heart, had proven itself once again.